Tell me more about that time. So you started running crews, you started managing events. Did you start speaking at events as well? What was that process like?
So from IT and being moved into Tony Robbins' production department, I was brought in right at the exact time that he divorced his wife, Becky Robbins. And so when I initially came in, I was the executive assistant to the head of production, because that was just the role that was open at the time. And while I was doing that, really quickly, they needed somebody to take care of their trainers. So the trainers are essentially the graduates of all the Tony Robbins events that would go around, and they were sort of like the top level of crew. So if you were at, say, a Unleash the Power Within event, and there's a fire walk that everyone goes through,
I've done it.
people, you have, that's right, because I asked you about that.
Yeah, yeah.
Love that. Yes, so these would be the people that were on the fire lanes that are sort of working closely, helping the participants go through. So the trainers used to be run by Becky Robbins, and when she left Tony, and there's a bit of craziness going on there.
Yep.
I was brought in to, I'm 24, right? I was 25 or something at the time. I was brought in to do that role, to suddenly manage this whole trainer body and leadership team that go around to all of his events, coordinate flights. They were international, so they were in Germany and the States, everywhere in the world, Australia. So I was having to coordinate them while having them yell at me because of the breakdown. Like Becky took off, and then I'm thinking, I have no idea what's going on here, and you're yelling at me. Okay, cool, I'll just listen.
Wow.
That's how I got into it. And because that happened, from there, naturally, I was then invited to go to some of the events to then be there as support for them. And then from there, I was asked to then manage his Wealth Mastery event and some of the trainer leadership events that happened just around the States and ultimately the world. And by default, fell into speaking, because when you're training teams, like of crew and people that are showing up at the events, you have to speak to them. You have to train them in a very short amount of time and communicate very clearly on what they're meant to do, whether it's to be sales or a door guard or whatever role they have.
You know why I chose you for this chakra then, don't you? Yeah, this is amazing. This is incredible. Now, at that time, were you still running your company, Miss I Have So Much Energy to Burn?
Yes, I was. Actually, so I was running my own events that were going on night on the weekends. Yeah, I was. But the thing is that, so I was working really hard. I had a full-time job. I wasn't traveling a lot for Tony Robbins, just off and on. I would come home and then...
Can I interject and say that full-time job is not normal hours though, is it? It's not like you were working 9 to 5. You were working...
Off and on.
Yeah.
Off and on. It depended. It depended on the week and the events that we had coming up.
Of course, yeah.
So I would get home around sort of 6 p.m. on some nights, or 7 p.m. And then I would go into my other entrepreneur mode for my own business and try and, deal with the artists and work out how we're going to fill our next event. And, I wasn't really making any money with that. And I wore all the hats, and I was running it with my boyfriend at the time. And that's when things started to shift, is then I was in the Tony Robbins world during the day, and I kind of was butting my head up against what he taught. I thought it's kind of, it's kind of lame. Because then at night I was around artists, lowbrow artists, fashion designers, funky people that made fun of personal development.
How
so
interesting.
So I was two worlds, right?
Yeah.
So I was around that. And then I remember, as part of me working for Tony, they said, we want you to go through one of his events. So I flew out to Dallas and went through Unleash the Power Within, like you went through. And while I was there, something woke up in me. I remember one of the people at the event, or maybe it was even Tony, said, you're the average of the 5 people you spend your most time with.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I came home
and
I started looking through that filter. And I realized that, to be quite honest, I lived in a house at that time. We were renting with my boyfriend who stopped working. So he was just kind of being an artist. We had... have you ever heard of the singer Jewel?
Yeah.
Jewel got her start in a coffee shop called Java Joe's in San Diego.
Wow.
So Java Joe himself sold Java Joe's, and he moved into our lounge room.
Amazing.
And we We had them, and then we had another guy. We lived with another guy named John from Michigan, and he was like sort of half working. And then he invited his mate out from Michigan as well. And suddenly, I'm in this house of losers.
Wow.
And I was looking at that, and I'm like, it's just not matching properly.
Yep.
So that's kind of how I ended up between the two worlds.
That's amazing. That's incredible. Synchronistic again with our journey, because at the time that you would have gone through his seminar, were you about 25 or 6?
I would have been.
Yeah, me too, when I was a social worker. And that was one of the comments that got me as well.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's really, we've never talked about this. I never actually put that I never put those timelines together before. And I was wondering why I was so miserable, so upset, why I felt like I was butting my head up against the wall, because I felt like I was perpetuating this vicious cycle, and I wasn't really being of service to anyone because they had no desire in any way, shape or form, for the most part at that time, to change. So I really wanted to attract a different type of clientele, and even people around me that were willing to take responsibility for their part in their life and take action to change.
And did that start happening once you made that decision?
Yeah. Not very quickly, very slowly, because again, I just thought, how am I going to do this? Where do I need to go next? And, you know, when you edit your story, especially in reference to the people around you, you have to make peace with the fact that, hey, these people are not in my highest alignment. And for me at that time, I felt quite guilty for even thinking that, much less saying that. I felt like I was this mean-spirited person. And there was also a part of me that thought, oh, who do you think you are? You've got to have compassion for people. You know, those stories that play out. So it took a long time to get rid of that guilt and those stories. And, you know, I think that loyalty is a wonderful thing, but when it comes to the detriment of your own growth, it's not in your highest alignment. And that was a big lesson for me.
Loyalty is a big theme in my life as well, as in I am too loyal and oftentimes holds myself back as a result. So that's interesting.
Isn't that fascinating? Wow.